October 9th, 1944, 04:30 hours. Near Aachen, Germany. Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Müller crouched in his command post, a reinforced dugout that had taken his company 3 days to construct. Through 4 years of war, from the triumph in France to the nightmare on the Eastern Front and now the defense of the Reich itself, Müller had learned to read the rhythm of artillery fire like a conductor reads a musical score. But tonight, something was different. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The American guns had been silent for nearly an hour, an unnatural quiet that made veteran German soldiers more nervous than constant bombardment. Then, at precisely 04:45, the world erupted, not in the gradual build-up Müller had experienced countless times, not in the methodical British style of walking barrages, but in a single overwhelming moment when hundreds of shells arrived simultaneously across his entire defensive sector. In the pre-dawn darkness, Müller's position simply ceased to exist. His carefully constructed bunkers, his interconnected trenches, his artillery-resistant overhead cover, all destroyed in less than 90 seconds by an American artillery system that represented a revolution in warfare as profound as the machine gun or the tank. What Müller experienced was the culmination of American artillery superiority, a dominance so complete that German commanders consistently identified it as the single most decisive factor in the Western Allied victory. The numbers tell part of the story. From Pearl Harbor to victory in Japan Day, American industry produced approximately 370,000 artillery pieces. By comparison, Germany produced roughly 175,000 artillery guns throughout the entire war, from 1939–1945. But simple gun counts masked the true disparity. The real story lay in ammunition, the lifeblood of artillery warfare. American industry delivered approximately 11 million tons of artillery ammunition to its armed forces and 43 Allied nations between December 1941 and August 1945. To put this in perspective, the United States produced 47 million tons of artillery ammunition during the entire war. German ammunition production faced chronic shortages that began in 1941 and grew catastrophic by 1944. Consider a single statistic that reveals the gulf between American and German artillery capability. In Normandy, during the summer of 1944, German artillery supporting the 5th Panzer Army could fire approximately 10% of the volume the British artillery alone could deliver, and the Americans were firing even more than the British. This wasn't a tactical problem Germany could solve through better training or superior doctrine. It was a material reality that reflected fundamentally different industrial capacities. The story of American artillery superiority began not on the battlefields of Europe, but in the dusty expanses of Fort Sill, Oklahoma, during the 1930s. While other branches of the United States military atrophied during the Great Depression and America retreated into isolationism, a small group of artillery officers conducted a quiet revolution in fire control and coordination that would reshape modern warfare. In 1939, the United States Army ranked 39th in the world, possessing cavalry forces that still relied on horses to pull artillery. Yet within this seemingly backward force, artillery officers like Carlos Brewer were developing concepts that would prove decisive. The Fire Direction Center, systematic plotting methods, integrated forward observation, and the revolutionary time-on-target technique that allowed shells from dispersed batteries firing at different times to impact simultaneously. These innovations represented a philosophical shift. American artillery doctrine viewed guns not as individual weapons but as components of an integrated system. A single forward observer with a radio could coordinate fire from batteries miles apart, bringing devastating concentrations onto targets within minutes. German artillery, for all its technical sophistication, operated under a decentralized philosophy that made such coordination impossible. The materiel basis for American artillery dominance began with production decisions made years before the first shots were fired. When President Franklin Roosevelt called in May 1940 Congress approved plans to expand American air power, he also set ambitious goals for artillery production. Adolf Hitler's advisors told him these figures were propaganda, impossible for any nation to achieve. They were catastrophically wrong. By 1942, American factories were producing artillery pieces and ammunition at rates that would have seemed fantastical just 2 years earlier. Consider the production of 155mm artillery ammunition, the medium howitzer round that became the workhorse of American artillery. In 1941, average monthly production was 49,000 rounds. In 1942, average monthly production exploded to 295,000 rounds. In May 1942 alone, American factories produced 567,000 rounds of 155mm ammunition, more than Germany, produced of all artillery calibers in many entire months. This production surge wasn't limited to one caliber. The standard American Infantry Division in 1944 was supported by 4 organic artillery battalions, typically including 3 battalions of 105mm howitzers and 1 battalion of 155mm howitzers. In addition, Corps and Army-level artillery battalions, including heavier guns like the 155mm gun known as the Long Tom and the 240mm howitzer, could be attached to support major operations. When American divisions went into action, they brought overwhelming firepower that German units simply could not match. A typical American infantry division could coordinate fires from 48 to 72 guns in organic and attached battalions. German divisions of equivalent size struggled to field half that number, and chronic ammunition shortages meant German guns fired far fewer rounds even when they were available. Lieutenant Wilhelm Hoffmann of the German 352nd Infantry Division experienced this disparity during Operation Cobra, the American breakthrough from Normandy in late July 1944. His company had assembled in what they believed was perfect concealment near Saint-Lô, preparing for a dawn counterattack. The morning was still dark, with only the faintest hint of light on the eastern horizon. Then, without warning, the sky erupted. Hoffmann wrote in his post-war memoir that there was no ranging shot, no gradual building of fire like they expected from the British. One moment they were moving through the hedgerows in silence. The next, the entire world exploded around them simultaneously. In 5 seconds, his company ceased to exist as a fighting force. What Hoffmann's unit experienced was time-on-target bombardment, where American artillery achieved what German commanders thought impossible, massing fires from dispersed positions without prior registration, striking targets with overwhelming concentration and minimal warning. The mathematics behind American artillery effectiveness was staggering. Batteries located miles apart using different gun types with varying muzzle velocities firing at different angles and elevations would coordinate fire to achieve impact within a 3-second window. This required pre-computed tables for weather conditions, wind, altitude, powder charges, and barrel erosion. Calculations performed by teams of human computers, primarily women, using mechanical calculators at facilities like Aberdeen Proving Ground. These firing tables, combined with specialized slide rules and plotting boards, allowed American artillery to achieve speed and accuracy that German observers described as seemingly impossible. A German artillery officer with the Panzer Lehr Division, Hauptmann Ernst von Klein, witnessed this capability during fighting in Normandy in early August 1944. His battery of 88mm guns was positioned near Mortain, supporting the German counter-offensive Operation Lüttich. They had carefully camouflaged their positions over several nights, confident they were undetected. At 5:15 in the morning, as they prepared to commence firing, von Klein noticed American observation aircraft circling lazily in the distance. He knew they had perhaps minutes. He ordered immediate displacement, but it was too late. The shells came not in a series but in a single overwhelming moment. All 6 of his guns were destroyed in less than 10 seconds. The crews simply vanished. The American Forward Observer System allowed trained artillery officers positioned with frontline infantry units to call fire from any artillery unit within range, not just their assigned batteries. When these observers requested fire missions, pre-computed settings allowed batteries to begin shooting immediately without ranging shots that would warn the enemy. This speed advantage meant American artillery could engage fleeting targets that would have escaped other armies' guns. Feldwebel Jörg Bremer of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division experienced this rapid response during a reconnaissance patrol near Saint-Lô. His squad had briefly exposed themselves, crossing an open field, visible for perhaps 30 seconds. They thought they were safe once they reached the tree line. Then the trees exploded around them. The Americans had seen them for half a minute and brought down artillery in less than 3 minutes. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate casualties. German medical officers documented what they termed artillery neurosis, a specific fear of American guns different from conventional shell shock. Dr. Heinrich Müller, a Wehrmacht medical officer captured in the Falaise pocket, documented this phenomenon. "The men feared American artillery more than fighter bombers," he wrote. "Aircraft you could see and hear coming, but American artillery struck without warning. It created constant anxiety that degraded unit effectiveness, even when no shells were falling." This psychological dominance stemmed from American artillery's ability to strike accurately in darkness. Pre-dawn bombardments targeted German units during their most vulnerable moments: morning stand to, meal times, and troop rotations. The American military standard required all rounds in time on target missions to impact within plus or minus 3 seconds, ensuring maximum casualties among troops with no time to take cover. These tactics created a sense of omniscience that eroded German morale. Soldiers began to believe Americans possessed technology to see in darkness, though it was simply careful daytime registration of targets for accurate blind fire at night. The evolution of American artillery tactics reached new heights during the Rhine crossings of March 1945. When the Ninth Army crossed the Rhine on March 24, 270 American guns opened fire simultaneously, delivering over 65,000 rounds. The initial barrage achieved rates of 1,000 rounds per minute in some sectors, a concentration of firepower unprecedented in warfare. Major Hans Kramer, operations officer for the German 116th Panzer Division, witnessed this bombardment from the East Bank. "The artillery preparation began at 0200 hours without preliminary registration," he recalled. "The first indication was the simultaneous impact of 500 to 600 shells. This was not a rolling barrage, but concentrated packets of destruction that annihilated specific positions completely before shifting. Counter-battery fire was impossible. We could not locate their guns, and any battery that revealed itself was immediately suppressed. Inside American fire direction centers, trained personnel converted observer requests into firing data for multiple batteries within minutes. These centers existed at battalion, division, and corps levels, allowing coordination across entire armies. A typical center could coordinate 72 guns from 3 battalions in brigade-level time on target missions. The process that took German or Soviet batteries 10 to 15 minutes could be completed by Americans in under 2 minutes. Captain James Richardson, a forward observer with the 30th Infantry Division, described the system in his post-war account. He could call for fire from a single battery or every gun in the corps. Within minutes, he could have 100 guns on target. The Germans never understood how one lieutenant with a radio could command that much firepower. The American philosophy viewed artillery as the primary killing arm, with infantry serving to locate targets and occupy destroyed positions. General George Patton exemplified this approach, stating that the war was largely won by artillery. A typical American infantry division in 1944 included 4 organic artillery battalions plus additional corps and army-level battalions, often totaling 8 to 12 battalions in direct support during major operations. German divisions rarely enjoyed such overwhelming fire support. Oberleutnant Friedrich Ackermann of the 2nd Panzer Division described facing this disparity during combat in France. German forces would identify American positions and request fire support, only to be told to wait for authorization or that no ammunition was available. Meanwhile, the Americans would drop hundreds of shells on German positions for merely showing themselves. The asymmetry wasn't just inconvenient, it was fatal. During Operation Lüttich at Mortain in August 1944, American artillery stopped 4 panzer divisions attempting to cut off the Allied breakout from Normandy. Stabsfeldwebel Werner Korte, who survived the destruction of 3 tanks during the battle, recalled assembling in darkness, believing themselves hidden. But as soon as they moved, concentrated salvos covered their entire formation. Tanks that had survived Russian anti-tank guns were torn apart. They couldn't understand how the Americans saw them in darkness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The answer lay in integrating multiple intelligence sources: forward observers, aerial reconnaissance, sound-ranging equipment that could locate guns by analyzing the sound of their fire, and signal intelligence all fed information to fire direction centers. This data was rapidly processed, allowing engagement within minutes of detection. The system represented information dominance translated into steel and high explosive. The proximity fuse, first used extensively in combat during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, further enhanced American artillery effectiveness. These fuses automatically detonated shells at optimal height for maximum effect against personnel. Grenadier Kurt Zimmermann described his first encounter. "We dropped flat as trained, but the shells exploded above us. The shrapnel came straight down. Half my squad was killed or wounded instantly. We had no defense." American artillery superiority fundamentally shifted battlefield dynamics. German commanders found traditional tactics obsolete. Concentration for attacks became suicidal. Daylight movement virtually impossible. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach analyzed the situation in his post-war writings. "The enemy's artillery exceeded anything experienced in Russia," he wrote. "Their artillery and aircraft observation functioned with clockwork precision. Movement and resupply became possible only at night, and even then with great difficulty. Integration with air power magnified artillery effectiveness. Forward observers could call fighter bombers as easily as artillery, creating a seamless system of fire support. During the pursuit across France in August and September 1944, armored spearheads advanced with observers in tanks calling immediate support from self-propelled artillery battalions. Major Robert Patterson of the 2nd Armored Division's artillery described the system in action. "They fired on the move," he recalled. Observers identified German columns. American forces would halt briefly, unleash time on target concentrations, and move before Germans could respond. They destroyed entire battalions that never had a chance to fight back. German units that had maintained cohesion through years on the Eastern Front disintegrated under American artillery. Hauptmann Franz Richter commanded a company in the 12th SS Panzer Division during their first engagement against American forces. His men were Russian veterans, hardened by years of brutal combat. In their first hour against Americans, they lost more men to artillery than in 6 months on the Eastern Front. The shells arrived without warning, covering their entire position before they could react or take effective cover. German adaptations, extreme dispersion, overhead cover, rapid displacement, only mitigated but never eliminated American dominance. The fundamental asymmetry of abundance versus scarcity, systematic precision versus individual skill, could not be overcome through tactical adjustments alone. Lieutenant General Wilhelm Bittrich, commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, assessed the situation with brutal honesty in his post-war interrogation. "Your artillery was not just a weapon but a system," he stated. "Every forward observer was a corps commander for 5 minutes." This democratization of firepower was revolutionary. Wherever we faced Americans, we faced their entire artillery. The material evidence of American industrial superiority confronted German soldiers daily. Colonel Wilhelm von Manstein, Chief of Staff of the 9th Panzer Division, wrote in his captured papers that American artillery created a battlefield where traditional concepts became meaningless. Their observers were everywhere, response immediate, ammunition unlimited. They achieved superiority through system efficiency that multiplied effectiveness tenfold. The pre-dawn strikes that German soldiers experienced across every front represented the culmination of American artillery development. Observers registered targets during daylight for accurate blind fire at night. Harassment fires prevented rest, while concentrated strikes at unpredictable intervals destroyed morale systematically. The ability to strike accurately in darkness created widespread belief among German troops that Americans possessed night vision technology, though the reality was simply meticulous planning, enabling devastating blind fire. The statistical reality was overwhelming. By 1944, American forces were expending artillery ammunition at rates that would have bankrupted any other military power. During the Battle of the Bulge, American artillery fired approximately 200,000 proximity-fused shells alone, each one a sophisticated piece of technology that German scientists had declared impossible to manufacture under battlefield conditions. Total American artillery expenditure during the Ardennes offensive exceeded several million rounds, a volume that German logistics could not have supplied even if their industry had possessed the production capacity. Consider the Rhine crossing bombardment on March 24, 1945. 65,000 rounds in the initial bombardment, sectors receiving 1,000 rounds per minute. These figures represented not merely American abundance, but systematic approaches to warfare that treated ammunition as a renewable resource rather than a precious commodity to be hoarded. German prisoners consistently identified this difference as psychologically devastating. They could accept being outfought. They could not accept being outcalculated. The transformation of warfare through American artillery reached its philosophical culmination in the observations of captured German senior officers. Generaloberst Hans-Georg von Friedeberg, negotiating German surrender in May 1945, reportedly stated that German forces could accept being outfought through superior tactics or courage. What they could not accept was being outcalculated. American artillery turned warfare into mathematics, and Germany had no solution. General der Artillerie Karl Verholty wrote extensively in captivity about German misconceptions. German doctrine had been considered supreme, refined through years of combat experience across multiple theaters. Yet Americans had made German conceptions obsolete through systematic innovation. They achieved what German military theory had declared impossible: massing fires from dispersed positions without warning, striking precisely without registration, maintaining continuous support without ammunition constraints. The human cost of this artillery dominance was staggering, but difficult to quantify precisely. Artillery was the largest killer in the European theatre, responsible for more casualties than all other weapons systems combined. While exact attribution is impossible, the overwhelming consensus among military historians is that American artillery accounted for a disproportionate share of German casualties in the Western theatre from June 1944 through May 1945. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The material basis of American artillery superiority extended beyond guns and ammunition to encompass the entire logistics system. American artillery units in Europe were supported by a supply chain that stretched back across the Atlantic to factories in the American Midwest. This supply chain delivered not merely ammunition, but replacement barrels worn out by constant firing, replacement optical equipment, specialized vehicles for ammunition transport, and the countless small components necessary to keep artillery systems operational. German artillery, by contrast, faced chronic shortages of everything. Ammunition shortages were most critical, but German units also struggled with worn barrels that reduced accuracy and range, damaged optical equipment that could not be replaced, broken fire control systems that could not be repaired, and increasingly desperate expedients like using captured Allied guns with mismatched ammunition that reduced effectiveness even when supply existed. The disparity in artillery effectiveness became most visible during static defensive battles, where German forces attempted to hold prepared positions. During the Huetgen Forest Battle, which raged from September 1944 through February 1945, American artillery transformed the dense forest from German defensive advantage into killing ground. The forest canopy that provided concealment became a liability when proximity-fused shells detonated at treetop height, showering defenders with steel fragments and wood splinters. German attempts to counter American artillery superiority through tactical adjustments proved futile. Dispersion reduced casualties per strike, but made coordination of defensive fire impossible. Deep bunkers provided protection but isolated defenders from mutual support. Rapid movement after firing prevented American counter-battery fire, but meant German artillery could not mass fires effectively. Every countermeasure carried costs that degraded German defensive capability, even when it reduced immediate casualties. The industrial basis of American artillery dominance revealed itself in maintenance statistics. American artillery units could sustain high rates of fire because replacement barrels arrived regularly from depots supplied by Atlantic convoys. German artillery units increasingly had to reduce fire rates to preserve barrels that could not be replaced. An American artillery battalion in active operations might fire 5,000 rounds per week, knowing that worn barrels would be replaced within days. A comparable German battalion might have allocation for 500 rounds per week, with no prospect of barrel replacement. Vehicle mobility amplified American artillery advantages. American guns were towed by trucks that could road march 160 miles per day under favorable conditions. German guns still relied heavily on horses for movement, particularly by 1944, when fuel shortages made motorization increasingly impossible. This mobility differential meant American artillery could concentrate rapidly for offensives, then disperse to avoid counter-battery fire, while German artillery remained relatively static and vulnerable. The self-propelled artillery that Americans fielded in increasing numbers by 1944 provided even greater mobility. The M7 Priest, mounting a 105mm howitzer on a tank chassis, could keep pace with armored advances and fire on the move. German forces had developed similar weapons, but chronic production shortages meant they remained relatively rare, while American self-propelled artillery became common. During the breakout from Normandy in August 1944, American armored divisions advanced with self-propelled artillery battalions that provided immediate fire support without waiting for towed guns to be brought forward. This integration of artillery with armored maneuver represented combined arms warfare at a level of sophistication that German forces could observe but not replicate, given their material constraints. The air-ground integration that characterized American operations in 1944 and 1945 magnified artillery effectiveness further. Fighter bombers and artillery were controlled through the same forward observer network, allowing seamless transition between fire support methods based on tactical requirements and weather conditions. When weather prevented air operations, artillery filled the gap. When targets appeared that required immediate engagement before artillery could be positioned, fighter bombers struck within minutes. This flexibility derived from systematic approaches to fire support that treated all weapons as components of an integrated system rather than separate capabilities. German forces, hampered by inter-service rivalries and decentralized command structures, never achieved comparable integration even when they possessed the technical means. The ultimate expression of American artillery dominance came during the final offensives into Germany in March and April 1945. As German defensive capability collapsed, American artillery shifted from breakthrough weapon to exploitation tool, destroying German units attempting to withdraw faster than they could be engaged by advancing infantry. The result was wholesale destruction of German military formations that ceased to exist as coherent fighting forces. Klaus Richter emerged on March 24, 1945, as one of 12 survivors from his company of 130 men. American infantry advanced through the shattered positions. Richter surrendered without resistance, his will crushed by systematic destruction that left no possibility of effective defense. His diary's final entry captured the psychological impact. "The war is lost. It was lost the moment the Americans learned to make their shells arrive together." The statistics tell only part of the story. During the Rhine crossing, 65,000 rounds in the initial bombardment, sectors receiving 1,000 rounds per minute. But the true impact was measured in destroyed combat effectiveness and accelerated Allied victory. German prisoners consistently identified American artillery as the decisive factor, not the number of guns, but the system integrating observation, communication, computation, and execution into seamless coordination, delivering overwhelming firepower anywhere with minimal warning. The transformation was complete. The Wehrmacht that had pioneered combined arms warfare, that had conquered most of Europe through innovative tactics, found itself helpless against American methods that represented a fundamentally different conception of modern warfare. For soldiers like Heinrich Müller, huddled in foxholes as the sky exploded with precisely coordinated fire, American artillery demonstrated that the war was decided not by courage or tactical skill, but by superior systems and industrial capacity. The revolution that broke German defensive lines in minutes represented American innovation at its most effective. Systematic superiority over individual heroism. Industrial method over warrior tradition. Organizational efficiency over tactical brilliance. The time-on-target barrages that devastated German positions were products of meticulous planning, mathematical precision, and an industrial base producing complete warfare systems rather than individual weapons. German soldiers learned modern warfare's hardest lesson through bitter experience. Courage and skill were no longer sufficient when facing enemies who could coordinate hundreds of guns firing from dispersed positions to impact simultaneously on any target within minutes of identification. The shells arriving simultaneously in pre-dawn darkness taught that industrial democracy had created warfare, where victory went to those best able to transform national resources into battlefield dominance. The artillery breaking German defensive lines in minutes had taken years to develop through systematic research, training, and industrial preparation. But its impact was instantaneous once deployed, announcing that the age of American military supremacy had arrived not through superior ideology alone, but through mundane excellence of mass production and systematic organization. The human dimension of artillery warfare remained visible in accounts from both sides. American artillerymen described the industrial process of destruction with professional detachment. Loading, aiming, firing became mechanical actions repeated thousands of times. German soldiers described experiencing something beyond conventional combat, a form of warfare where human agency seemed irrelevant against mathematical precision and industrial abundance. The disparity between German expectations and American capabilities created cognitive dissonance that many German veterans never fully resolved. They had been taught that German military excellence derived from superior training, doctrine, and individual fighting quality. American artillery demonstrated that systematic approaches and material abundance could overwhelm traditional military virtues. This realization, as much as physical destruction, broke German will to resist. The legacy of American artillery superiority in World War II extended far beyond immediate battlefield results. The systems and methods developed during the war became foundations for modern artillery doctrine. The integration of forward observers, fire direction centers, and compelevers, communications networks pioneered by American artillery between 1940 and 1945, established patterns that remain relevant in contemporary warfare. The industrial lessons proved equally enduring. American ability to mass-produce sophisticated systems demonstrated that democratic industrial economies possessed advantages over totalitarian systems, despite German assumptions to the contrary. The proximity fuse alone represented industrial achievement that Germany attempted but never accomplished, a single example of broader American superiority in translating scientific innovation into mass-produced weapons systems. The organizational innovations, particularly the Fire Direction Center and Forward Observer System, represented conceptual advances as significant as hardware improvements. These systems multiplied the effectiveness of individual guns by enabling coordination at scales previously impossible. A single artillery piece became a component in a vast network that could concentrate fire from hundreds of guns on any target within minutes. The psychological dimension of artillery dominance manifested in ways that transcended immediate physical effects. German soldiers developed learned helplessness when facing American artillery, a recognition that no defensive measure provided reliable protection. This psychological impact degraded combat effectiveness, independent of actual casualties, as units hesitated to concentrate for attacks or move during daylight, even when American artillery was not actively firing. The ultimate irony of German experience with American artillery was that Wehrmacht doctrine had emphasized mobile warfare, partially to escape the artillery dominance that had characterized World War I. Yet, by 1944, American artillery had evolved to counter mobility through rapid coordination and devastating time-on-target concentrations that caught German forces during movement when they were most vulnerable. The transformation of artillery from blunt area weapon to precision system, capable of engaging specific targets with minimal warning, represented one of World War II's most significant but least appreciated revolutions in military affairs. While attention focused on aircraft, tanks, and naval vessels, artillery killed more soldiers and decided more battles than any other weapons system in the European theatre. For Heinrich Müller and countless German soldiers who experienced American artillery, the technical details mattered less than the overwhelming reality. When shells arrived simultaneously from multiple directions with no warning, when foxholes provided no protection, when ammunition seemed unlimited and fire could be called on any position within minutes, traditional military skills became irrelevant. The only rational response was surrender or death. The material basis of American victory in Europe rested on many factors, including manpower, industrial production, air superiority, and logistics. But artillery represented the clearest expression of systematic American advantages. Every shell fired demonstrated American industrial capacity. Every time-on-target concentration proved American organizational superiority. Every rapid response to forward observer requests showed American technological integration. German military excellence, refined through years of combat experience, proved insufficient against enemies who approached warfare as an engineering problem, to be solved through systematic application of resources. The Americans did not need to outfight German soldiers in individual combat. They simply needed to coordinate overwhelming firepower against any position German soldiers occupied. The result was predetermined by material factors that no amount of tactical skill could overcome. The story of American artillery in World War II ultimately reveals how modern warfare transformed during the 20th century. Traditional emphasis on individual courage, tactical brilliance, and warrior ethos gave way to systematic approaches that treated combat as industrial process. The side that could coordinate resources more effectively, that could translate industrial capacity into battlefield results most efficiently, possessed decisive advantages that traditional military virtues could not counter. For German soldiers facing American artillery in 1944 and 1945, this transformation manifested as sudden, overwhelming destruction delivered with mathematical precision. The shells that shattered their positions represented not merely explosive power, but systematic superiority across every dimension of warfare, from scientific research through industrial production to battlefield coordination. The arithmetic of destruction revealed itself most starkly in comparative ammunition expenditure studies conducted after the war. American forces in the European theatre of operations expended artillery ammunition at rates that exceeded German production capacity by factors of 5 to 10, depending on the time period examined. During active operations in France from June through August 1944, American armies fired more artillery ammunition in 3 months than Germany produced for all fronts during the same period. This disparity was not merely quantitative, but represented fundamentally different approaches to warfare. German military tradition emphasized conservation of resources, careful planning to maximize effect of limited ammunition stocks, and reliance on tactical skill to compensate for material shortages. American doctrine treated ammunition as an abundant resource to be expended liberally, with the primary constraint being transportation capacity rather than production limits. The logistics of American artillery operations illustrated this philosophical difference. An American infantry division in active operations required approximately 600 to 800 tons of supplies daily, with artillery ammunition comprising 40 to 60% of total tonnage depending on operational intensity. German divisions in defensive operations during 1944 typically received 100 to 200 tons of supplies daily, with ammunition comprising an even larger percentage of the reduced total, but still representing far less absolute volume. Transportation infrastructure magnified these disparities. American truck production during World War II totaled approximately 2.5 million vehicles for military use, providing mobility that allowed ammunition to move from ports to firing batteries with minimal delay. German forces relied increasingly on horse-drawn transport as fuel shortages and Allied air attacks degraded motorized logistics. By late 1944, Wehrmacht divisions were rated based on their mobility, with fully motorized divisions rare, and most formations dependent on horses for a substantial portion of their transport needs. The impact of this logistics differential became visible in ammunition availability at the sharp end. American artillery battalions in Europe typically maintained ammunition stockpiles of 1 to 3 days of intense firing at their gun positions, with additional stocks at forward ammunition supply points, ensuring continuous resupply. German artillery units by 1944 often possessed ammunition, measured in hours of intense firing, with resupply uncertain and dependent on nighttime transport that avoided Allied air interdiction. Major Friedrich Schiller, who commanded a German artillery battalion during the defense of the Siegfried Line in autumn 1944, documented this disparity in captured papers. His battalion of 12 105mm howitzers received ammunition allocations of approximately 100 rounds per gun per week during active defensive operations. He calculated that American battalions of comparable size were firing 100 rounds per gun per day during the same period, a tenfold disparity that made sustained defensive fire impossible for German forces. The human cost of this ammunition disparity manifested in German infantry casualties. Infantry units depend on artillery support to suppress enemy forces during attacks and to break up enemy assaults during defense. German infantry increasingly fought without adequate artillery support, taking casualties that effective fire support would have prevented. American infantry, by contrast, benefited from artillery support so abundant that forward observers became selective about targets, engaging only those presenting significant threats rather than conserving ammunition for critical moments. This relationship between artillery abundance and infantry casualties appeared clearly in comparative casualty statistics. American infantry divisions suffered lower casualty rates per day of combat than comparable German divisions during the same battles, despite Germans defending from prepared positions. The differential derived partly from American artillery suppressing German defensive fires, allowing American infantry to advance with reduced exposure to enemy fire. The technological sophistication of American artillery systems provided qualitative advantages that compounded quantitative superiority. The proximity fuse represented the most dramatic example, but numerous smaller innovations contributed to overall effectiveness. American artillery employed sophisticated communications equipment that allowed reliable voice communication between observers and fire direction centers under battlefield conditions. German artillery communications relied more heavily on wire lines vulnerable to artillery fire, creating delays when communications broke down during combat. American survey techniques allowed rapid and accurate positioning of artillery batteries, essential for the massed fires that characterized time-on-target missions. German survey equipment was comparable in quality, but American systematic approaches to survey and positioning meant batteries could be emplaced and ready to fire more quickly after displacement. This mattered during mobile operations, when artillery needed to reposition frequently to support advancing forces. The training of American artillery personnel reflected systematic approaches that characterized the entire artillery system. Forward observers underwent extensive training in target identification, coordinate determination, and fire request procedures that made them effective even when relatively inexperienced. Fire direction center personnel trained on standardized procedures that allowed rapid computation of firing data with minimal error rates. Gun crews drilled on loading and firing procedures until they achieved rates of fire that maximized each gun's mechanical capabilities. German artillery training emphasized individual skill and adaptability, valuable qualities, but less amenable to systematic exploitation than American standardized procedures. The result was that average American artillery units achieved performance levels comparable to elite German units, while the best American artillery units exceeded anything German forces could field. The integration of artillery with other combat arms, reached its highest development in American armored divisions during exploitation operations. These divisions employed self-propelled artillery battalions, equipped with 105mm howitzers mounted on tank chassis, allowing artillery to maintain pace with tank spearheads. Forward observers travelled in armoured vehicles at the front of advancing columns, calling fires on German positions before they could organise effective resistance. During the breakout from Normandy and subsequent pursuit across France in August 1944, American armoured divisions advanced at rates exceeding 30 miles per day while maintaining continuous artillery support. German forces attempting to establish defensive positions found themselves under artillery fire before they could properly organise, forcing continued withdrawal that prevented formation of coherent defensive lines. The psychological impact of this mobile artillery manifested in German prisoner interrogations. Soldiers described feeling hunted, unable to pause long enough to establish positions without coming under accurate artillery fire within minutes. This constant pressure degraded unit cohesion as exhausted soldiers struggled to maintain organization during continuous retreat under fire. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 through January 1945 provided the ultimate test of American artillery doctrine under crisis conditions. German offensive operations achieved initial surprise, creating a bulge in American lines that threatened to split Allied forces. American artillery responded with flexibility and effectiveness that exceeded German expectations and contributed decisively to containing and then eliminating the penetration. Artillery battalions, separated from their parent divisions during the initial German assault, attached themselves to whatever American units needed fire support, demonstrating the flexibility of the American artillery system. Forward observers continued directing fires even when surrounded, coordinating support for isolated American positions. Fire direction centers processed missions from multiple observers simultaneously, coordinating fires from batteries that had never trained together but operated on standardized procedures, allowing seamless integration. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.